Hello. UFC 277 last night. Man, pretty fun card, all in all. You know, I feel like the fight announcements that have been coming up lately, like the fight in Abu Dhabi and all the shit with Nate Diaz versus Khamzat Chimaev, right? We should probably get into that a little bit today too. But all that kind of overwhelmed what a big fight this was. I think that it kind of went how you expected it to be honest. If I'm being honest with myself, right? Juliana Pena put on a brilliant performance against Amanda Nunes in the first fight, right? And she just kind of hunkered down, stood her fucking ground, stuck the jab in Amanda's face. And I think the mistake that Amanda really made in the first one was she realized that she was dropping Peña in the first round, right? Realized that her power was there. And I think she thought that she could get Peña out of there if she put her feet on the gas a little bit, right? So when Peña would land, Amanda would try to get in there and do some damage. And I think that Peña just kept sticking the jab in her face over and over and quite literally beating her to the punch. And it resulted in, Peña being able to just consistently apply that pressure. But in this fight, you saw that Amanda was a little bit more patient. Fought the fight a little bit more at her pace. Scored 3 fucking knockdowns in the second round. I mean, dominated. This fight went how I expected the first fight to go, if I'm being honest. Like I said, the fucking upset by Juliana Pena in the first fight is one of the most spectacular upsets in UFC history. Maybe the greatest upset in UFC history. Hard to argue that it's not, right? Especially if you look at what Amanda did to Juliana in the rematch. It almost further cements what a big upset it actually was for Peña to win, right? Because Amanda came back against a girl that she just lost against, just got finished by, and put on a brilliant display. I mean, 2 10-8s at least in that. I thought the one round undeniably was a 10-8. And fuck, man, she just showed you why she is the greatest female competitor of all time in mixed martial arts. I mean, I don't think there's any denying that. And I think that even if Peña had won, Peña would still have a very long road to go before being able to eclipse that, right? And make that argument for herself. But Nunes went in there and just kind of re-cemented, I'm the best in the world this first time. I don't want to call it a fluke. It's kind of a disrespectful way to refer to what a performance Peña had, right? It was just the fact that Peña sat down on her punches and fought a fight that won. That's why we watch mixed martial arts at the end of the day, though, right? Is for moments like that, right? For these big upsets and for the unpredictable and for the potential for things like that to really happen. But again, last night, we got a little bit of a dose of reality, right? And I think we were reminded how great Amanda Nunes is and how great she is everywhere. And you guys noticed too, they were saying that Nunes seemed a little bit hesitant to go to the ground with Peña, and I agree, but if you go back and watch the very first fight, when Nunes was and even throughout this fight, guys, when Nunes was on top of Peña, Peña gives you trouble. And she throws up submissions and stuff, all that good stuff, but she's also kind of built a little bit I don't want to say awkwardly. She just has longer limbs and she's kind of stiff, and her jiu-jitsu from the bottom is very annoying. You could just tell in the first fight especially that Nunes wasn't 100% comfortable there, and that Peña was able to get to positions where she could wrestle up, and she just always makes things annoying. And she did that from her back in this fight. And I also want to say, despite the fact that Peña got beat up, she showed a lot of fucking heart in this fight, man. I mean, she got dropped a lot of times. She was getting beat up in just about every position. She was still just going out there and fighting and still trying to get in Amanda's face. And still connecting with the couple shots that hurt Amanda. So, I know that Amanda, on the whole, dominated this fight and that the scorecards were accurate. 100%. I thought that, I kind of thought the 50-43 was warranted. But the scorecards don't show you the heart and the tenacity and the warrior that Juliana Pena is. And what a war that fight really was. That was not an easy fight for Amanda by any stretch of the imagination. She just did what she had to do and won. She dominated, but it didn't come easy. It's not it was just a handout, right? She was just going out there and blitzing through Peña. Peña made things tough. She had moments where she almost swept Amanda, and Amanda was able to stay on top. But the big difference maker, I think, with Amanda, and I think it's true for a lot of the women that she fights, is Amanda just has that fucking power. And she gets that leverage from her punches that a lot of other girls in the division just don't have. The way she sits down on things and the amount of, like I said, the way she's able to, drive through from her hips and generate all that power. Not a lot of women can do that. And you got to see, even, granted, there were situations where Juliana Pena was coming forward and kind of like sloppily boxing and continuously running into that right hook, right? Like coming forward, throwing punches out here, overextending yourself, like leaving your chin up, and Amanda comes around with the right hook and boom, sits you down. So some things that, but like also we look at like moments like that and I feel like kind of like almost like pick those and single in on them. But in the course of a fight, sometimes those blitzes work. Like you don't see it in traditional boxing, and when Amanda counters it looks foolish. But there are moments where people do charge forward like that and find success just because they're able to push their opponent back, right? In this instance, it wasn't working though. Amanda was on fucking fire last night, and she looked like the best to ever do it again. So it was great to see Amanda Nunes like go in there and kind of reclaim what was hers. But it also was kind of good to get some closure on this whole thing. And, you know, like I said, I think you saw last night, regardless of the performance that Juliana Pena had in the first fight, like in terms of just like pure martial arts skill, I still think Amanda Nunes is the best to ever do it. I think she has the best resume, and I think that like nobody's arguing that after last night, right? So great performance. And normally I don't normally I'll work my way from the bottom of the card up, which is what I guess we'll do now. But yeah, just thinking about everything and like, man, Amanda Nunes is the fucking GOAT. You know what I mean? Like, she really went out there, and against, like I said, a girl, just impressive performance. But anyway, let's move on to the next. Actually, no, while we're here, let's just fucking talk about it. Let's just finish this segment out, right? So, what comes next for Amanda Nunes? You got to wonder, is she going to go... 145 seems like it might be kind of beat, and you know, Joe Rogan mentioned last night too. Why not ride off into the sunset? I mean, you came in... You've beat Ronda Rousey, Holly Holm via knockout. You knocked Holly Holm out the way Holly Holm knocked out Ronda, right? She's beaten who? Megan Anderson. I mean, she just beat... And this is the thing, this is the argument that people always make about Georges St-Pierre. Georges St-Pierre never lost a rematch, right? So, when Amanda lost the first fight to Peña, huge upset, but very similar to GSP going on to defeat Sarah in the rematch, Nunes did the same thing. Right? So there too, it's almost like if you're very good and you're showing that you have competence to beat everybody in your division and you lose, there's like forgiveness to be had there in the GOAT status if you can go in and avenge your loss. And Amanda Nunes fucking did that last night. So great performance from her. What's next? I don't know. The bantamweight division doesn't have a ton of people coming up through it right now that I'm super excited about. You know, like Ketlin Vieira and stuff is there, but it's nobody who I'm looking at right now and I'm thinking, damn, that's going to be the one to beat Amanda Nunes. So if you're her, do you keep running through these people and like racking up these title defenses and waiting for the challenger to get there? Because in my opinion, it's going to be a long time before the challenger gets there and actually can challenge Amanda Nunes skill for skill. Like, unless Amanda starts kind of getting into that older age territory where you got some killer coming up and that matchup happens, I don't really see anyone at 135 beating her or like holding a candle to, like I said, it's her skill set. Like, she's good everywhere. I want to look at the rankings real quick and just see, like, we got Nunes, Pena, Vieira, Holly Holm, Raquel Pennington, Irene Aldana. Are we thinking Aspen Ladd? Yana, are we thinking any of these girls are going to beat Amanda? You know what I mean? And like I said, she can just stay there and try to defend. And she can just keep, like, knocking off these title defenses and stuff. But, like, man, I don't know. And then you go up to 145, and it's like Macy Chiasson, Norma Dumont, Josiane. Like, what is going on? There's nobody here that we're going to be excited to watch Amanda fight next. So the question is, do you let these top contenders who are a little bit closer in skill start to battle it out amongst each other? Or do you stay there and fucking just keep picking them off because it feels like that's what she's going to do? I don't know. But the answer really might be, if I'm being honest, the answer might be to book Nunes and Pena a third time and do the rubber match. Because, like, regardless of how dominant Amanda Nunes was last night, and I know it's very hard to pitch that after she lost, you can make a good argument that there's not a more exciting fight in the division. Like, at least Peña goes out there and is willing to go to war with her. I mean, Amanda Nunes slept Holly with the high kick, right? It's not like Holly's going to be fighting her. The next best option is probably Ketlin Vieira. That's what I think. And I'm not excited about that. I would rather personally as a fan, not talking about logistics, what needs to happen, not talking about the scorecards or why it makes sense, strictly as a fan, Nunes versus Peña is the fight that I'd like to see again next. Let him run it back. Let's see what the fuck happens. Why not? It's 1-for-1 right now. Go back and fucking, let's figure this shit out. You know what I mean? So, I don't know. But anyway, I digress. Moving on to the rest of the card. Let's work our way up from the prelims, and we'll start talking a little bit more about the rest of the main card, right? So, the very first fight of the night, Orion Koski, I hope I'm pronouncing that, I can't remember, versus Blood Diamond. There were moments in this fight that were very fun. But if I'm being honest, this felt like a bout that should have been on Cage Warriors or, like LFA. That's really how I felt. I don't think that either of these guys had the skill level to be fighting in the UFC, especially on a pay-per-view card. Like, it was entertaining, that fucking double back fist landed, but there were just so many little mistakes that they were making. And, like, I think that Orion should have been able to get, like, Blood Diamond up against the cage, and once he got him there, he should have been able to work takedowns pretty effectively against him. There were things that he was lacking in terms of his defense. When it did go to the ground, he doesn't have a lot of, like, fundamental skills in place to get back to his, like, I think that Orion was lacking the fundamental skills to get him to the ground and hold him there consistently. Like, I think his cage wrestling could use some work. I think his timing on things could use some work. I think his positioning could use some work. This fight, if I'm being honest, while pretty entertaining, did not feel like a UFC caliber fight to me. And I think that if you put either of those guys in there against people who are ready and who are at that UFC level, like people coming off the Contender Series and stuff who are like, we've seen them go, like, I feel like they, I don't know. To me, it just didn't feel like a fucking UFC fight, if I'm being honest. That's my honest opinion. I don't think either guy's ready. I think they could use more time on, like, the regional scenes and make their way up through different organizations and then get there with time. It's not that they don't have the potential. I just thought both guys are here prematurely. Neither of them look great. I mean, Orion did a good job of closing things out strong in the third round, and there were moments where they hurt each other, but, like, and I'm, like, picking this fight apart. I don't mean to be, like, too critical of it, but just, like, the footwork and stuff and the fluidity and the distance and stuff. Like, there's like, when you watch certain people fight, like when you watch Brandon Moreno and Kai Kara France fight last night, it's very obvious that they're almost doing, like, a little dance with each other, right? Like, they're flowing in and out. They understand the range. They start to find it slowly over time, and this just felt like neither of them were really settling in, and, like, Orion more so than Blood Diamond started to settle in, right? But just with nothing that made me feel like, oh, yeah, like, there's the technical prowess that's going to, like, accelerate you through the rankings. Doesn't feel like it's there yet. I think it needs more work. Anyway, moving on. The next fight, the odds on this were pretty even, and I don't know if that's because of Ihor Pretoria's record, but you got to realize that for Nikolai Negumereanu, man, he's had a few fights in the UFC now. Right? He's got some of that experience under his belt, and I thought that was going to be a big deciding factor going into this fight, and I think it was. He won the first round, and when the second round came around, caught fire, had him up against the cage, was landing everything, throwing big knees over and over and over again until he finally got the finish. And again, this is just a case of, like, there are phenoms who come in like Khamzat Chimaev who are just ready for that moment for whatever reason. When they get there, they've been honed, their skills are ready, and the moment doesn't seem to affect their nerves or whatever as much. They seem very comfortable in those situations, and they come out with a style that just blitzes through people. But when that doesn't work, like, Negumereanu, like, is a guy who's, like I said, it's important to just get the cage time in, and he's had the cage time. He's picked up a couple wins in the UFC now. And when you're comfortable in the octagon, that's usually when you win. Usually the guy who is more comfortable, more calm, more collected, who is picking his shots and being intelligent about the fight is the one who's going to win. It's just how it goes. So last night, Negumereanu's slight favorite. I thought that he should have been a little bit of a bigger favorite. And I thought that this was a tough matchup from Pretoria because, like, it was hard for him to get anything really going. So it's hard to kind of take things away from this one other than the fact that, like, fuck, I got beat up a little bit. You know what I mean? Like, I have work to do. So, I don't know. Tough matchup for Ihor Pretoria. I know he had that big win on the Contender Series and everything, that knockout, and people were pumped about him, but that UFC experience, man, even if it's just a few fights, being there and having done that, especially on a pay-per-view card, when you got a big audience and you know it's a big moment and a lot of eyes are on you, important to have that. Jocelyn Edwards versus Ji Young Kim. Jocelyn Edwards just looked big in this fight, man. I thought Kim, personally, I think she had a good second round, but I thought that Edwards won the first and the third. You could just see when they were standing there, and Jocelyn Edwards was working those kicks really well. And, like, speaking of those kicks, her legs, when they were standing next to each other, her legs were just so much bigger than Ji Young Kim's. She was just a bigger girl, and I think she won the fight. And, I mean, these split decisions that are coming out, we have to be very careful, right? I want to take a minute and, like, talk about judging here and, like, the importance of it. Like, there's this thing going on in the MMA community right now and just, like, online in general, where every time a questionable fight happens, people rally behind a fighter and they support them. The most recent example I can think of is the Michael Johnson fight. Who did he just fucking fight? Hold on. Shit. Fucking taking me to the Sprinter page on Wikipedia. I can't believe it slipped my mind. My fucking memory is terrible. Jamie Malarkey. Everybody was acting like Michael Johnson got fucking robbed. Michael Johnson did not get robbed in that fight. That was a close fight that you could argue that Michael Johnson won. But Jamie Malarkey had a fucking good, like, you could argue that he won 2 rounds. So people, though, get behind a fighter and then start saying, oh, these judges are terrible. That was an actual, like, good split decision to me. So we have to be careful when we just start throwing that out there, right? The most egregious example on the card we're going to talk about in a little bit was Hamdi Abdelwahab. I'm going to fuck that name up a million times. Versus Dontel Mays, right? But we have to be careful at throwing around these things where we're like, oh, the judging's terrible. Because then when you actually do have egregious examples, like what happened in Hamdi Abdelwahab versus Dontel Mays, where Hamdi clearly won the third round. Clearly. And you would have to be fucking insane to think that Hamdi didn't win the third round. When a judge scores that round for Dontel Mays, these are the things that concern me, right? Because the winner came out victorious, but it makes you wonder, and Seth Fuller's the guy who fucking judged this fight. Whatever he saw was clearly wrong. But it makes you wonder, if you're sitting in that judge's chair, right, and you know for a fact that the guy won the first round, lost the second, and is definitely winning the third, right? If you say, okay, if I just mark this down, I know the other 2 judges are going to give him the round he clearly won. If I just mark this as a 10-9 the opposite way, then we have a split decision. Now, if you're betting on the fights beforehand and you're betting on a split decision here, right? What the fuck? This is what I get concerned about, right? And then what if 2 judges do that at the same time and a guy loses a fight because of it? This is the concerning part to me. You really have to start wondering when you see something like that if they have money on the goddamn fight. Like, money on the outcome in one way or another. And that's what's upsetting to me. I don't get upset about close fights that aren't actually robberies. Robberies are like examples like if Hamdi had lost this fight because 2 judges gave the third round to Dontel Mays, now we're talking about robbery. Right? More concerning to me than close fights that the majority of the public feel went the wrong way. And let's just be honest. The majority of the public are not educated on fighting. They're watching some shit, getting excited about it, not paying attention, right? Maybe they catch some things from the fight, some highlights from it, and they're not really, like, fully taking in all the things going on, or they don't have an understanding about what positions matter, or, like, blah, blah, blah. The general public is not very fucking, like, they should not be a good, like, we shouldn't be relying, now MMA outlets and stuff, when they score things, you're talking about people who have invested their life in the sport. So when you see scorecards coming out from places like ShareDog and they're scoring it and their people, different story. But the general public clamoring all over social media and Instagram, oh, it's a terrible decision. We have to stop doing that and pay more attention to fights where the winner is actually correct, but the scorecards are fucked. And the way, like, these split decisions where we get the right winner is more scary to me because it's opening up these windows for people to realize, like, oh, I can get away with a little bit of bad judging here if it's obvious that the other 2 judges are going to score it a certain way. And then you got to bring up the thing like, oh, are we talking about, like, is money getting involved? So I don't know. That's my biggest takeaway from it. I don't get upset about close fights. I don't care how you score it. In my opinion, like, if a fight is close, fighting at the end of the day is always going to be subjective. There's nothing you can do to remove that element about it, right? If you're judging a fight, there are going to be opinions. I don't give a fuck about the rules. People keep talking about the rules. Now we need to stick to the rules and this and that and that. But at the end of the day, when I watch fights, you could tell me all that shit, and like at the end of the day, I'm still going to have a gut feeling about who I feel won the fight and why. Now, if you can provide justification for that, it further cements your argument, right? And I would prefer that judges, especially in split decision fights, I almost think they should have to write up justifications for why they scored the bout the way they did afterwards, so that we can at least look at it and go, oh, that's why he scored it that way. If you can't justify your argument, then we need to start examining you, right? And saying, like, what is this person's interpretation of fighting and why is it so far off from reality and what other experts think? So that's my rant. I'm just saying stuff like that is way more concerning to me when I see a scorecard like that. And it kind of, like I said, gets swept under the rug because we complain about all these close fights and close decisions and how terrible judging is. But we're not honing in on the things that are actually really bad. And that one was super egregious. I think Seth Fuller is... I'm not going to say bad. I don't even know the fucking guy, but I'm telling you right now, if he wasn't watching the fight or he doesn't know what's going on when he's watching fights. Which is interesting because if you look at the rest of his scorecards, I think he scored the rest of the night correctly. Which goes back again to, you got a little something riding on this, man? I don't want to be accusatory, but you watch that third round and you think that fucking Don'Tale Mayes won? Goddamn, man. Maybe you shouldn't be judging fights or reffing fights. That's all I'm saying. Anyway, moving on. Let's go on to the Michael Morales rant over, right? Let's move on to Michael Morales versus Adam Fugit. I'm going to fuck so many of these names up. I always do, guys. I try to memorize them and stuff, but they just never stick for some reason. So, sorry. Anyway, Morales, though, had to battle through some adversity in this fight, right? Taken down in the first round, and I think that Adam was a little bit more durable and awkward than he thought he was going to be. I think he kind of thought he was going to have an easier time getting him out of there. And when the fight started to advance, you started to see that Morales was like, okay, he's going to be here for a little bit. Regardless, though, just kind of like kept staying steady. And then in the third round, found the finish. And it was a good finish for him. And man, Michael Morales is a kid to be excited about. He's only 23 years old. But I do think he has a lot of technical things to clean up before he starts like advancing up through the rankings too quickly. He has a lot of power, but he needs like... I think things could be straightened out a little bit. I think he could be a little bit more defensively responsible. I think he could use a little bit more lateral movement. A lot of stuff that you want to see him develop, but he's only 23, man. What are you going to do? He's knocking people the fuck out. And he's 14-0, right? So is it 15-0 now? I don't know. One of the two. So impressive record either way. All right, moving on to the main preliminary card, which aired on ABC and ESPN last night. We kicked things off with Drakkar Klose versus Rafa Garcia. And this was a fight, man, where I felt like Garcia did a good job, but Klose just like the boxing and the wrestling overall. And really, you could argue that Garcia had a more successful time in a lot of like the offensive wrestling exchanges than Klose did. I mean, there were moments where Klose got around to his back, tried to elevate him, and Garcia defended nicely. But this was a big win for Drakkar Klose against a tough guy in Garcia. I'm a big Rafa Garcia fan, man. I think he's just like a tough, gritty dude who comes forward. And like Klose said it after the fight too. He's like, that's one of the toughest dudes ever fought. Hamdi Abdelwahab versus Don'Tale Mayes. This is the fight that we just kind of talked about, right? First round, the rounds were so cut and clear, you almost didn't need to I didn't even think it was going to be a question. But first round very obviously went to Hamdi. He hurt him. Got him up against the cage there and started landing those big right hands before he dropped him and got on top of him. Don'Tale Mayes came out in the second round and kind of like controlled the striking exchanges. Hurt Hamdi pretty bad. Had him in some fucking troubling spots. And then in the third round, you got to see that the wrestling started to come into play, and Hamdi very clearly won and dominated the third round. So Seth Fuller, watching these goddamn fights and trying to judge them, gave the third round to Don'Tale Mayes. How? I don't know. We get the right winner, but we have an idiot judge like fucking watching God knows what while the fight's actually going on. Like I said, if you can write up a justification on that and tell me why you think Don'Tale Mayes won that round, then fine. But I guarantee you that the defense is not going to be very good. There's no fucking way. There's no way. There's no way to give it to him. Anyway, moving on to a fight where we did not need the judges. Drew Dober versus Rafael Alves. Geez, I can't fucking talk today, huh? Dober's a guy, man, who like obviously trains out of Elevation Fight Team, and I have a fucking Easton shirt on right now, right? At House's Elevation Fight Team. So I'm obviously going to be rooting for him, but he looked good, man. Dober's a very solid kickboxer. And he weathered like kind of that early storm from Alves early on, but basically the entire fight, there's that black line that runs around like the perimeter of the octagon. Dober held Alves behind that line like the entire time. And when you do that, you start to restrict movement a little bit, right? And it lets you start opening things up. And Dober was able to, land that liver shot in the third round that ended the fight. I think he may have lost the first, won the second, and then came out and just kept the pressure on and got the win in the third. You could tell that by the time the second round came around, that consistent pressure from Dober and keeping him back, like keeping Alves pushed back against the cage, was starting to wear on him. And then there was like an eye poke, and Alves like got a jolt of energy. Like I was like, what the fuck's happening here? I've never seen anything like this. It was like he was like reinvigorated. But that small break, like he went through all that energy and everything and started returning fire, dancing against the cage, and it just kind of burnt out, and Dober was able to keep just steadily applying the pressure, right? Big win for Dober. Alex Morono versus Matthew Semelsberger. This was a fight where I feel like you don't know till after. I don't want to say too much too soon, because I say that a lot, right, with some guys. Because I personally thought that Semelsberger was going to win this fight. I thought that he just had the range and everything, and that Moreno would have a hard time getting inside. But really what Moreno did is just, we were talking earlier about how, who was it? Morales, like, needs a little bit more side-to-side movement. That's something that Moreno did brilliantly in this fight, right? Side-to-side movement, just kind of picking his shots and dotting Semelsberger up. And then Semelsberger rallied in the third round, came out, hurt Moreno. And you know what? Semelsberger ended the second round really strong too. When he got on top, he was landing those fucking heavy blows from there. But when the third round came around, that was Semelsberger round. Oh my God, I can't talk today. Semelsberger's round, and his best chance to close the fight out, and he just wasn't able to do it, right? So a great fucking performance from Semelsberger, in my honest opinion, against a guy in Moreno who had a way bigger experience advantage. Way bigger experience advantage. Like I said, okay, it's weird how these themes keep recurring throughout this, right? But we were just talking about how, like, Drew Dober did a really good job of pushing Alves up against the cage and keeping him behind that black line. That's exactly what Semelsberger needed in this fight. He needed more forward pressure and to limit the side-to-side movement, right? If he could start pushing Moreno up against the cage, there's less space for him to move. And then you start cutting angles to cut his footwork off, getting your jab working, bringing hooks around to the side that he's trying to exit on just to keep him honest, centering him up, and then the pressure starts coming. This is one of those things, though, where you look at Semelsberger, and I hate to say this because Moreno had a great performance. It still kind of feels like Semelsberger came out on the winning end of this, right? He's not going anywhere after that third round that he had, and you got to see that, like, I think personally, with a little bit more experience, Semelsberger goes out and wins that fight. I think he's capable of winning it, and I think his confidence didn't really start growing until the latter part of the second round. And then once he got it, he was like, okay, I'm feeling pretty good now, right? But that needs to be consistent. The pressure needs to be there from the opening bell, and it just took him a little bit too long to get going and realize that he had some advantages over Moreno. Like I said, I think Semelsberger comes out on the winning end. He fought a more exciting fight than Moreno, even though Moreno won and looked great, right? But it also just like leaves you some room to be like, okay, this kid has some potential still. He's just a little bit green in areas. And Moreno went in and did his fucking job and exposed that. But Semelsberger was the one with most of the exciting moments, and I think, like I said, he started coming on strong at the end, and it wasn't a skill thing necessarily. It was just an experience thing and not knowing, like, what do I need to do in this moment to utilize my skills the best that I can and make sure that they're successful, right? It's not that he doesn't have the skills. It was just a matter of, like, timing and everything, and the distance wasn't quite there. It's just, like, shoring up those little things so that you can start connecting, and then when you start connecting, everything starts to flow together a little bit more. Really struggled with the distance and the range, and a lot of that was because of the movement of Moreno. And, you know, more leg kicks would have done Semelsberger good too. You use leg kicks, start backing him up, start limiting that movement. Like, it's got to be like a combination of those things. That's why it's mixed martial arts. So he's a kid that I'm still pretty excited about. I think he has a lot of potential. I think we could see him hanging around for a while, having some fun fights, but just like man, a little bit green. Just got to get that experience. But man, Semelsberger's walking away with, I think, more fans than he went into that fight with. And that's saying a lot because he's had some impressive performances to date. All right, main card time. So, Magomed Ankalaev versus Anthony Smith. Ankalaev was a massive favorite heading into this fight. And I know that the way it ended, anytime there's like an injury or something, it's kind of like a little bit climactic, but Ankalaev was checking leg kicks throughout the entire first round. And when the second round came around, did it again. And it caused Anthony Smith was so hurt that he actually pulled guard, right? Like, you don't typically see that. Typically, if you're going to go up against the cage and push it there, you're not going to fall down and take guard, right? I'm not saying, however, that that's a terrible game plan, because Anthony Smith is capable of finishing fights from his back, and he has really good jiu-jitsu, and if your ankle or whatever is broken, it's not a bad option to go there. And also consider this. Ankalaev's on a 9-fight win streak right now in the UFC, right? But his last loss was to Paul Craig in like the last second of the third round when he got triangled. So if you're Smith, you're like, all right, this might be a path to victory for me, because he's kind of like picking me apart on the feet a little bit. I can't get my leg kicks going to slow down his movement. He's picking his shots. But Ankalaev just looked like a professional last night. He was able to maintain position. He didn't really give Smith anything. He wasn't letting him work his guard effectively. Had a very good base about him, and just kept everything calm and composed while he was on top, and just kind of picked the shots until he was eventually able to work his way to the finish. So Ankalaev with some good work on the ground from the top position, and kind of showing maybe against a veteran like Smith that he's shored up some of those holes that cost him the fight in the bout against Paul Craig. So Ankalaev is the guy. What do you do here, right? What do you do at 205? Because if I'm being honest, the fight that I really want to see next is Yuri Prochazka versus Ankalaev. I want to see what happens there. But the war that Glover Teixeira and Yuri Prochazka just had is like, oh, maybe I want to see that, you know? Maybe I want to see them run it back, and maybe I want to see them run it back before Glover starts to get too old, right? He's already old. He's already pulled off kind of like what feels like impossible. But that fight against Yuri Prochazka was a war. And I think you're crazy if you don't want to see how that plays out as well. So I'm torn on this. I think Ankalaev is definitely, in my opinion, the next title challenger. I mean, again, let's pull up the light heavyweight rankings real quick. Who else is in there right now? You know? We got Yuri, Glover, Jan, Rakic, and Ankalaev. Those are like the top 5 guys, really, 6 guys, right? Thiago Santos is on there, Dominic Reyes, but like I don't think they're really in that title contention thing right now. I think the bout is Yuri Prochazka versus Ankalaev. Also, this is completely unfair, and I think that I'm flip-flopping here. I actually think they should do Glover versus Yuri. Glover's put so much into the UFC and has had so much time. But if I'm being honest and just going off my gut and what my gut is telling me here, right, which is wrong sometimes, but I feel like Yuri wins the rematch against Glover most of the time now. Like, I feel like that was a great performance from Glover, but I feel like Yuri is just going to make the adjustments. He's younger, he's probably more adaptable, and he'll probably come out and dominate that second fight. Ankalaev versus Prochazka, though, much more intriguing. I don't know what happens there, right? Because Ankalaev is one of those guys who remains so technical the whole entire fight. And Prochazka is a guy who, while technical, is a little bit wild, right? And it makes you wonder, does the wildness get through and earn the victory for Prochazka, or does Ankalaev kind of pick him apart in those moments where Prochazka's kind of gotten away with before? So, fuck, man, I don't know. I think that the more interesting fight is Prochazka versus Ankalaev. But I think that the fight that should happen, based on how the last one went, and just, like I said, all the time and experience and everything that Glover's given the sport, they should probably rematch next. But in terms of the matchup I want to see more, I want to see what happens when Yuri and Ankalaev throw down. But anyway, again, per usual, I digress. We move on. We'll see what happens. But to me, that's the fight. Guys, Alexandre Pantoja. What the fuck? We knew Pantoja was good, man. Like, if you watch how he controlled Royval on the back, he just followed him around effortlessly. And Royval's one of those guys who never accepts positions. And his ground game is slick, man. It's nasty. He gets out of a lot of tricky situations. He's never holding still. People have a hard time controlling him. And you knew when you saw that like his jiu-jitsu is very slick, very good, right? But when he fought Perez, I thought Perez might kind of have that, like, first off, both of these guys like to fucking throw down, right? Like, if you watch their fights, they're perfectly willing to sit in the pocket and just bang it out. I kind of thought Perez, he fights a little bit lower, right, like down here. I kind of thought him sitting down in the pocket as Pantoja came into range with those punches, he might be able to clip him. And I also thought Perez was going to get his offensive wrestling going. Another thing, Perez is fucking strong, man. Like, you can tell when he gets on top of guys that the pressure is just a little bit different. And in most fights, I would rely on that because I think that, like, his power is pretty, like, his strength and stuff when he's in top position is pretty surprising to a lot of the guys that he fights in a light division. And I thought, over the course of the fight, Pantoja's jiu-jitsu, while he would throw stuff up, Perez would just kind of fend it off. And the top pressure would start to wear on Pantoja as they went, right? Like, I thought Perez was going to have to fight through some danger from the guard of Pantoja, but would just stay on top and wear him down and consistently just, like, beat him up until the jiu-jitsu stopped being so threatening and he could kind of stay on top to get a win. That's kind of how I thought the fight would play out. But fucking Pantoja had different ideas, man. He came out and throwing a fucking flurry of punches, got around to the back right away, climbed right up the back while Perez was standing and just tapped him with really more of a neck crank. And I did a breakdown on this one, or I'm going to, right? I haven't recorded it yet, actually. But when it is available, I'll put a little card and you guys will be able to click it on, I don't know, somewhere on this fucking screen here, right? You'll be able to watch it, though. But I'm going to do a breakdown on this one because, man, I thought it was a brilliant performance. And like I said, one where I thought Pantoja might struggle a little bit with the strength and the wrestling of Perez, actually. But his jiu-jitsu and his technique was just so slick it didn't matter. All right. The heavyweight bout between Sergey Pavlovic and Derrick Lewis was obviously stopped early. But I have to say, and I heard Dana White say this in the interview after, when people fall a certain way, it is concerning. Like, when you fall backwards, it's kind of like normally because, like, maybe a guy clipped you and that's, like, where your momentum was taking you. But any time that you fall forward, I think refs are going to take that a little bit more seriously and maybe be a little bit more like, what's the word? Like, you're going to be more willing to stop the fight early in situations like that because you have cause you have cause for concern. Like, the way that the fighter fell is more concerning than if he had fallen back. Also, another thing to consider is when a guy falls back and he's on his back, you can read his facial expressions a little bit more. When he's just down in front of you, you can't really see what's going on in his eyes or in his face and stuff like that. And when the other guy's just throwing punches, I mean, man, yes, it was stopped early. I'm a fan of finality, but these fucking mistakes happen, man. And, you know, I'm not going to lie, too. It wasn't looking good for Derrick Lewis. And Pavlovic is a guy who starts quick and, like, has a bunch of first-round knockouts, and he was swarming Lewis. And I think he had the speed advantage, a little bit of the movement advantage. But again, when you stop the fighter, and you can't blame Dan Miragliotta for this too much because, like I said, it happens. And it's almost like an understandable instance because, like I said, the way he fell. But in hindsight, it was a mistake. And if you let Derrick Lewis recover, who's to say that Pavlovic didn't expend himself trying to get that knockout and then Derrick Lewis has all his power, boom, connects with something and ends the fight. Like, you can never tell. And again, this was a mistake, but it was an understandable mistake. So, fuck, man. I mean, that's really all I have to say about this one. Sometimes that fucking shit just happens. And sometimes it's more understandable than other situations, right? Let's see. Let's move on to the flyweight title fight. We already talked about the main event, right, between Nunes and Pena. We spent quite a bit of time there. But let's talk about this rematch between Moreno and Kara France. Man, Brandon Moreno is just like one of those guys who I feel like is just, in a lightweight class, he's going to have a lot of advantages because he's willing to crowd your space. And I think the thing that, like, Kara France has is, like, he's an excellent counter striker. He's very precise. If he has you out at range, he's going to win a lot of those exchanges. But it's Moreno's willingness to kind of, like, get into that fight with you a little bit. Not stay so technical that gives Kara France problems, right? Like, Moreno also, obvious, like, he throws that left high kick constantly, and Dean Thomas I'm just listen to the fucking guys in the commentary, pick up a bunch of shit, right? But he mentioned this, like, that left high kick keeps that right hand of Kara France that he knocked out Garbrandt and shit with, it keeps it glued to his face defensively. So he's not able to be, like, he's not able to let it fly as often. And, man, when Moreno changed it up and brought that kick to the body, it immediately crumbled him over in the third round. and Moreno swarmed him, man. And it kind of went how the first one. Well, actually, I think you could argue that the third round was maybe the strongest round for Kai Kara-France up to that point, right? And in the first round, Kara-France landed a big right hand on Moreno. Like, there were moments of success that Kai Kara-France was finding when he caught that body kick that Moreno threw actually earlier in that round. The same body kick that finished him, he caught and took him down and did some damage from there right before Moreno worked his way back up. But Moreno, man, just finding the timing and the placement for that. And as soon as Moreno got back up, I was surprised because, like I said, Kara-France caught that kick and got the takedown, but then Moreno threw it again and it landed successfully, and then he threw it again a little bit later and it ended the fight. So Moreno, man, is just one of those guys who, like I said, his willingness to, he's always doing this fucking shit, moving his hands around at all these weird angles and stuff, right? And, like, he's hard to fight. Like, he's, like, a little bit awkward, but his boxing is very crisp, right? And he's very good with his footwork. He moves forward at the right times. He pushes people back. He knows when to let off the gas, when to put the gas on. And the biggest difference maker, I think, in this fight was, like, that championship experience, right? And knowing when it was time to push a little bit, even when he did get into some troubling situations. So I don't think this is the last that we're going to see of Kai Kara-France. I think he's still dangerous, and I think he's still improving. Both of these guys are still young. But I think that Moreno is just a tough matchup for him because Kara-France kind of, like, gets into situations where he can create a little bit of space and counter and start landing that power that he has, and it's usually a difference maker. But Moreno just rolls with everything so well too, right? So, like, a lot of that power that Kara-France, when he lands it clean on other people and it hurts them, it doesn't hurt Moreno so much because he rolls with things. So I think that's a big difference maker as well. But I think that's going to wrap up pretty much all the fights on the card. I think we've talked about all of them. Like I said, we covered fucking Nunes and Peña towards the beginning, so don't have to go over that again. But yeah, man, it was a fun night of fights. There's another fight, I believe, coming up this weekend. I'll try to get a breakdown out for it. Thiago Santos versus Jamal Hill. Big fight for Jamal Hill, who's been, Vicente Luque versus Jeff Neal's on there. That's a great fight. Augusto Sakai versus Sergey Spivak. Rest of the card's all right, but the co-main and the main event, Thiago Santos versus Jamal Hill in the main event, and Luque versus Jeff Neal in the co-main. Those are some big fights. But yeah, guys, that's going to wrap this one up. Like I said, I have a breakdown out right now for Alexandre Pantoja, or I'm getting one out. I keep saying I have it out. I haven't recorded it yet, but it'll be out eventually. I'll try to, like, put a little thing in here, like I said, a little box that you can click on to watch it. I'm going to try to make one for Paddy Pimblett versus Jordan Levitt from their match last week today as well. So keep an eye out for those. But otherwise, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate it. And, have a great fucking day. Bye-bye.